Hello, in this video we'll be going through how to do rear brake upgrades on 1 and 3 series cars with E chassis, so E8x and E9x, and this is for non-M cars only, so everything from your 116i to your 335D. First we'll go through two different methods of carrying out this upgrade using two different types of calipers, and then we'll go into different discs that you need to use with these calipers depending on what type of hub and handbrake layout you have, and then we'll go through the main differences between the calipers, main differences between the pads, pros and cons, some second-hand buying advice, and I'll upload some pictures and maybe give you a walk around of one of the cars that I have here that has one of these upgrades fitted. Before we jump into the details, we need to talk about the different hub depths and the different handbrake sizes that we have on these cars. So what you need to remember is that there's two sizes of handbrake. You have 185mm handbrake, which is the large, and you have the 160mm handbrake, which is the small. So the large handbrake discs will be at the top, in the top row, and the small handbrake discs will be in the bottom row. And the other thing that you have to bear in mind is that there is two different hub depths on these cars. So you'll have a deep hub and a shallow hub. So a deep hub we'll have on the left hand side, and a shallow hub you'll have on the right hand side. A deep hub usually has the discs that have a height of 77mm. So 77mm is this height here, and the shallow hub usually has depth of 67mm, which is this height here. And if you look at the two discs next to each other, you can just about see 10mm difference in the hat height, which is to accommodate for two different hub sizes. So two different hub sizes and two different handbrake sizes, so four potential different handbrake and hub combinations. If you want to determine what size handbrake your car has and what depth hub is on your car, what you need to do is look up some part numbers. So first go to bmwfans.info or Real OEM. They're the same sites essentially. I prefer bmwfans.info because it has a slightly more user-friendly interface. Type in the last 7 digits of your VIN. So let's say this one, for example. And that will select the car and all the parts listed for that car. Then go into brakes and find the part number for the rear brake disc. So rear discs, part number for that would be under item number 2. You have 336mm by 22mm disc. So we'll copy that part number and we'll try and find a technical drawing for that disc. I tend to use autodoc.co.uk. They're really good for technical drawings of different parts. So head over to there, paste your part number for the rear discs. I know ATE are great for technical drawings. They're very detailed, so let's just select ATE as a brand. And let's have a look and see if we can find the dimensions we're looking for. Here we go, technical drawing for ATE disc. So the handbrake size is H, 185mm, and the offset of the disc, the hat height of the disc is D, which is 67mm. So this is a shallow hub with a large handbrake. If you can't find a technical drawing for the disc that's as detailed as this, and the handbrake size isn't specified, what you can also do is go back a step here on BMW Fans and look at the handbrake support ring or handbrake backing plate. So let's just go back a few steps and scroll down the page on the brakes, and it will be here. So if you look at part number 6, which is the support ring for the handbrake shoes. It will have the handbrake size listed next to its part number. Going into the first method, let's talk a little bit about this caliper. So this is a 2-piston Brembo caliper. It's found on the E chassis cars, so it came as standard on 135i's, e82 and e88 body shapes, and it uses 40mm pistons and is designed to work with 324mm disc by 22mm thick. These calipers are also available in Phoenix Yellow with M Performance written across them. They're part of the M Performance range that BMW made available on the E9x and e90x and e8x chassis cars. If you're buying these brand new from the dealer, the M Performance ones tend to be a lot cheaper than the grey ones, even though they're identical. So bear that in mind. So if your car has layout 1, which would be a large handbrake and a deep hub, you can buy an off-the-shelf disc. This is a 324mm disc by 22. It's got 77mm height, and it's designed to work with this caliper if you have the layout 1, which is large deep layout. It's available in smooth and in drilled and grooved, so you have a choice which one you go for. Moving on to layout 2. Layout 2 is very similar to layout 1. It's when you have large handbrake and a shallow hub, so 67mm hub depth, and again these discs are available off the shelf. They're almost the same as those, 324mm by 22, and they're designed to work with that caliper if you have a shallow hub and a large handbrake. And again they use OEM bolts, which are M10 by 26mm bolts. Moving on to layouts 3 and 4. Layouts 3 and 4 are for cars that have small handbrake, 160mm, and layout 3 would be for cars with deep hub, and layout 4 would be for cars with shallow hub. We will use the same type of discs for both of these layouts. So if your car has a deep hub, we'll space the caliper so it centers on the disc, and if your car has a shallow hub, you won't need to space the caliper, it will just fit. However, this disc needs to be modified before it can work with this E-chassis caliper. So this is the F-chassis 345mm disc by 24mm thick, 160mm handbrake cavity, and it has a shallow offset 67mm disc height. So what needs to happen for this disc to work with this E-chassis caliper, we effectively need to reduce the overall diameter of this disc from 345mm to what it is now, down to 324mm. That's what's specified to work with the E-chassis caliper. And the way to do that would be to have 10.5mm machined of the edge of the disc. And you can do that pretty much in any machine shop that has a lathe, and they can just turn this disc down and take the necessary amount of material off the edge of the disc. Another question that arises when you're using the shallow disc with a deep hub is whether the handbrake will still have enough surface area to make contact with to still be able to hold the car. And the answer to that question is yes, because you're only moving the handbrake shoes out by 10mm. So if you can see there, that contact patch is about 30-35mm wide, so you're only losing a third of that contact patch. So it still works pretty much as intended, providing the handbrake is adjusted accordingly. So once you've had the discs turned down or machined down to work with the caliper, and your car has layout number 3, so deep hub, you will have to bring the caliper forward by using spacing and longer hardware to make sure that the caliper is sitting center with the disc. You need about 10mm worth of spacing between the caliper and its mounting points on the car, and the way to do that, I find best to use standard steel washers. You can buy yourself a pack of let's say 20 or 30 of these of 1mm or 1.5 to 2mm thick, and just stack them up accordingly until you have the caliper centered with the disc. And of course you will need slightly longer bolts. So the original bolts you see there are M10 by 26.5mm, and these here are M10 by 35mm, so almost 10mm longer. And the reason why you need longer hardware is because obviously you're using spacing, and if you are using spacing you need to make sure that you still have enough thread engagement going into the caliper to make sure that the joint is robust. So that's layout 3 covered: spacing and longer bolts. And if you have layout 4, so shallow hub, again discs will need to be modified as I just explained, but then the caliper should just bolt right up and everything should fall into place without any issues, and you should be able to use OEM factory hardware. Another 2 points to mention for layouts 3 and 4: you are using a slightly thicker disc than that caliper was designed to work with. What that means is the clearances between the disc and the caliper tabs inside are going to be very tight. So given the part-to-part variation, sometimes what you may need to do is you may need to file a little bit of this face here just to make sure that you're not getting a touch condition between the face of the disc and these locating tabs for the pads. I've only ever had to do this once on one caliper. The other side was absolutely fine, and you literally take about 0.5 of these tabs, and then the clearance is pretty perfect. And final point to mention is if you have layout 3 and you are spacing out the caliper with new bolts, make sure you are going for steel bolts in 10-9 grade, because that is what's specified for braking bolts, for bolts on braking joints on most vehicles. That's the harder type of steel. So don't buy the 8.8 steel because it's softer, and do not buy stainless steel because that's even softer. So make sure you go for 10-9 grade bolts. So now that we've covered method 1 using E-chassis caliper, let's move on to method 2 using the F-chassis caliper. If you've chosen to go for these calipers, the first thing that will have to happen is you will have to convert the caliper attachment points by replacing the original caliper bushings with these eccentric caliper bushings. So what you have here is, this is the original caliper bushings, or caliper inserts as some may call it, and they are M12. They have M12 thread in them, and this here is the replacement caliper bushings that are needed to adapt these calipers to work with these chassis, and these are M10 eccentric caliper bushings. We actually make these to order, so if you need any of these, do let me know. We can supply them, we can make them to order, and we can ship them worldwide. So the way to install this is you will first have to remove the original caliper bushings, and the way to do that is to either press them out or to tap them out in that direction. Once you've tapped them out, this is what they look like. You will then proceed to insert the new ones, and you insert the new ones in such way that the hole in them is closest to the edge of the caliper, like so. And this is to essentially move the caliper further away from the center of the hub. If you haven't seen my previous video, these calipers are available in 2 different piston sizes. The calipers themselves are the same dimensions wise, but some calipers come with 40mm piston and some calipers come with 44mm pistons. The calipers that have 40mm pistons have stamping on the right tab, and the calipers that have 44mm pistons have stamping on the left hand tab. Similarly to the first method using E-series caliper, when you're using the F-series caliper, you still have 4 different hub and handbrake combinations. So I've laid the discs out the same way for this method as I did for the first method. So layouts 1 and 2 are for cars with large handbrake, and layouts 3 and 4 are for cars with small handbrake. Layouts 1 and 3 are for deep hubs, and layouts 2 and 4 are for shallow hubs. So going into layout 1, deep hub, large handbrake, you will have to use F chassis, M Sport rear disc, 345mm, 67mm depth, 24mm thickness. And what you'll have to do is you'll have to use about 6 to 7mm worth of spacing, similar to how we discussed it for the method 1, and you will have to use longer hardware, so the same as we discussed in method 1, M10 by 35mm, to make sure that the caliper sits center across the disc. Moving on to layout 2. For this layout you'll have to use E60 rear disc. This disc is 345mm by 24mm with around 63mm height, so it's slightly shallower than the F-Series disc. And for this disc you use original hardware, and you will of course have to have modified the attachment points on the caliper by using the caliper bushings. Now on to layouts 3 and 4. So this is small handbrake, deep hub and shallow hub. So let's say that this here will be layout 3. For layout 3 you will need to use longer hardware, M10 by 35mm. You will have to use about 6 or 7mm worth of spacing, similar like you did with layout 1, and you will have to use F-chassis rear disc for cars with small handbrake. Now moving on to fourth and final layout. So fourth and final layout is small handbrake, shallow hub, and for this layout you will have to do the most work really. So if this is what your car has, you're just unlucky, but this is what you have to do to make this work. You will have to use the same disc as we did for layout 3. So the F-chassis disc, M Sport, 345mm by 24mm thick, 67mm height, for cars with small handbrake. This disc will fit directly onto your car. You just need to modify the back plate, just trim it accordingly to make sure it's not catching anywhere on the disc, and it will fit. Okay, once you've done that, you then need to modify the caliper, and this is how you modify the caliper. You will of course have to use the caliper inserts, and you will also have to machine the back of the caliper down by a few millimeters. So this caliper here has had this modification carried out, and it's had 3mm shaved off the back of the mounting tabs. In this particular case there's still a bit of a lip left here. You won't need that lip, so what you'll have to do is you'll just have to come straight down here and get rid of that lip to make sure that that lip is not interfering with the attachment points on your vehicle. Furthermore, you will also have to modify these tabs here. 3mm off the back of the tabs on the caliper isn't actually enough to have the caliper sitting perfectly on this disc. So there's one of the two ways of doing it. You can either use a 1 or 2mm spacer between this disc and the face of the hub, so here, or you can file these tabs down by about 1mm or 2 to make sure that the disc is not touching them. And once that's done, that's the end of your worries. Okay, so that's two different methods covered, E-chassis method and the F-chassis method, and there's all 4 different hub type layouts and handbrake layouts covered as well. Now let's just talk a little bit about the pads themselves and the differences in contact patch. So F-chassis pads, E-chassis pad, the overall contact patch area is more or less the same between the two, but the shape is slightly different. So with the F-chassis you have a taller pad but narrower, where with the E-chassis you have a wider pad but shorter. When you use this pad with these discs for method 1, perfect contact patch. When you are modifying the F-chassis discs to be used for the scenario 1 E-chassis caliper, and you're taking a little bit off the edge, again you're creating a perfect contact patch. So you're effectively taking off everything that this pad isn't touching. The fitting hardware for the pads are actually different between the two. They're not interchangeable. If you are buying these calipers second-hand. The e-chassis calipers are very difficult to find, and I don't think Brembo make replacement pistons for them, so if you ever have issues with pistons, if they're pitted or corroded, you can't actually buy an off-the-shelf replacement if you want to rebuild this caliper with new pistons. So you either have to buy a new caliper, or you can have the pistons machined to spec, so to basically replicate what these pistons are. The F-chassis calipers are a lot more readily available. They're a little bit newer than the E-chassis calipers, and you can buy them pretty much anywhere. We stock these calipers most of the year round. We ship these calipers worldwide. They retail with us for about £250 plus fees and postage, depending on where you are and how you're paying. The caliper inserts are also available, as I mentioned earlier in the video, so if you need these, let me know. And finally, let's have a look at this lovely E87 120D here. So this is my wife's car. Thank you very much, darling, for letting me having a fiddle with this car and using it as a guinea pig to do my brake upgrades. So on the front we are using F-chassis 340mm kit, which is direct bolt-on. The only thing that I needed with this option was a 3mm spacer, because the caliper was very close to the spokes, so we used a tiny 3mm spacer that you can't even tell it's there. On the rear we're using method 1 e-chassis caliper, and we're using the car has layout 3, so layout 4 rather. So shallow hub, small handbrake, and this disc was modified to fit. So you can see these calipers used to be grey to start with. I've had them rebuilt and painted blue to match, and these are the F-chassis discs that I've had machined down to the correct diameter, and this is the contact patch that the pad is making with the disc. So this is now a 324mm disc, and this is where it's been machined down to fit. Right, I think that concludes the video. So thanks everyone for watching. If you have any questions, please let me know. Check out our Facebook page, VOS Garage. If you think any of this information is incorrect or incomplete, please do let me know. Any comments are welcome. If you need any of these parts, get in touch. We have loads of these parts in stock. We have discs, pads, calipers, and we're generally just happy to provide any buying and fitting advice. So hope to see you all again soon. Thank you all for watching, and take care.